In the mid-1960s, a French naval vessel crosses the Atlantic toward New York Harbor. Its cargo hold is empty on the outbound journey. It will not return empty. Down beneath the streets of Manhattan, 80 feet below the Federal Reserve Bank at 33 Liberty Street, lies the largest concentration of monetary gold on Earth. Behind a 90-ton steel cylinder set into a wall of concrete, thousands of bars sit stacked in numbered compartments, each cage assigned to a foreign nation. When France redeems its dollars, workers in leather aprons and magnesium foot guards move bars weighing roughly 28 pounds each from one cage to another, or onto pallets bound for the docks. This is what monetary conversion actually looks like. Not a wire transfer, not a ledger entry, but men lifting metal. Charles de Gaulle's government has made a calculated decision. Rather than hold American paper, France demands the yellow metal that paper is supposed to represent at the fixed rate of $35 per ounce. French aircraft and ships are dispatched to ferry the bullion home to the vaults of the Banque de France on the Rue de la Vrillière in Paris. Between 1962 and 1966, France converts hundreds of millions of dollars into gold, drawing down its dollar reserves with deliberate, unmistakable intent. Each shipment is a physical statement. The dollar promises to be as good as gold, so France collects the gold. The message reverberates through the world's central banks, because if the promise is real, others may test it too. And every bar that leaves Liberty Street reduces the pile behind that 35-ton door. The United States had emerged from the Second World War holding roughly 20,000 tons of gold, about two-thirds of all the monetary gold in existence. It seemed inexhaustible. It was not. The warships crossing the ocean were symptoms of a deeper strain, a widening gap between promises made and metal held. To understand why a proud ally would haul bullion across the sea, and why it could, we must return to a resort hotel in the mountains of New Hampshire, where in 1944, the rules of the entire system were written. July 1944. At the Mount Washington Hotel in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, 730 delegates from 44 Allied nations gather while war still rages in Europe and the Pacific. Their task is to design the monetary order that will follow victory. They remember the catastrophe of the 1930s, the competitive devaluations, the collapse of trade, the beggar-thy-neighbor tariffs that helped fuel the descent into global war. They are determined never to repeat it. Two men dominate the room. John Maynard Keynes represents Britain and argues for a new international currency he calls the Bancor. Harry Dexter White represents the United States and the United States. Holding most of the world's gold and producing half its manufactured goods, gets its way. The agreement they forge is elegant in its logic. The US dollar is fixed to gold at $35 per ounce, a rate set by President Roosevelt back in 1934. Every other currency is then pegged to the dollar within narrow bands. The British pound, the French franc, the German mark, the Japanese yen. Each is defined in dollars, and the dollar is defined in gold. This makes the dollar the anchor of the entire system, the world's reserve currency. Foreign central banks can hold dollars instead of gold, confident they may redeem those dollars for metal at the U.S. Treasury whenever they choose. Two new institutions are born to police the arrangement: the International Monetary Fund, to lend to countries facing balance of payments crises, and the World Bank to finance reconstruction. Currencies become stable, trade revives, and the post-war boom is unleashed. For the United States, the privilege is enormous. It can print the currency the whole world needs to conduct commerce. Its paper is accepted everywhere as if it were bullion itself. But the arrangement carries a hidden condition, a promise embedded in its foundation. Every dollar held abroad is a claim on American gold. As long as those claims stay smaller than the hoard, the system holds. The moment foreign dollars outnumber the gold behind them, the promise becomes impossible to keep. By the late 1950s, that moment was arriving. The very success of Bretton Woods planted the seed of its destruction. For the world to trade, it needed dollars, and only the United States could supply them. Year after year, America ran deficits in its balance of payments, spending abroad, investing overseas, stationing troops in Europe and Asia, sending Marshall Plan aid to rebuild shattered economies. Dollars flowed out by the billions and accumulated in the vaults of foreign central banks and the accounts of overseas banks. This was necessary. Without that outflow, the world would have starved for the currency it needed to grow. But it created an arithmetic trap. By the late 1950s, the number of dollars held outside the United States began approaching, and then exceeding, the value of American gold reserves at $35 an ounce. In 1958 alone, the U.S. lost over $2 billion in gold. The vault beneath Liberty Street and the depository at Fort Knox were shrinking, while foreign dollar claims kept climbing. In 1959, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin appeared before the U.S. Congress and named the contradiction with devastating clarity. His argument became known as the Triffin Dilemma. To supply the world with the dollars it needed, he explained, the United States had to run persistent deficits. But those very deficits steadily undermined confidence that the dollar could still be redeemed for gold. The two goals were irreconcilable. If America stopped running deficits, global trade would choke for lack of reserves. If it kept running them, the day would come when foreign dollar holdings dwarfed the gold behind them, and the promise of convertibility would be exposed as a bluff. There was no stable path between the two. The system was living on borrowed time, and Triffin had put a name to the clock. For a few years, the warning was noted and set aside. American gold still seemed vast, confidence still held, and the machinery of Bretton Woods ground on. But across the Atlantic, a leader with a long memory and a longer grudge was reading the same numbers Triffin had read and preparing to act on them. In Paris, Charles de Gaulle was ready to strike. February 4th, 1965. In a crowded press conference at the Élysée Palace, President Charles de Gaulle delivers a broadside that shakes the financial world. He denounces the international monetary system as unjust and calls for a return to a genuine gold standard, one in which no single nation's paper enjoys special status. Gold, he declares, is the immutable, impartial standard, unchanged in essence for millennia, belonging to no country in particular. His finance ministers and his advisor Jacques Rueff, a fierce advocate of gold, had prepared the ground. The target is unmistakable: the United States and what the French bitterly call its exorbitant privilege, the ability to finance its deficits simply by printing the world's reserve currency, borrowing endlessly from the rest of the planet at no cost. De Gaulle resents this deeply. He believes America uses its monetary dominance to buy up European companies with paper it prints at will, and to fund policies France opposes. His resentment is not merely economic. It is a matter of French sovereignty and pride, a reaction against Anglo-American hegemony that runs through all his politics. And he does more than complain. France backs its rhetoric with action. Throughout 1965 and beyond, the Banque de France systematically converts its accumulated dollars into gold at the U.S. Treasury window, demanding metal for paper, bar after bar. France reduces its dollar holdings deliberately, driving its gold reserves upward. It repatriates the bullion from New York to Paris, the ships and planes of the opening scene now explained. By pulling out physical gold, de Gaulle is not just enriching France. He is stress-testing the American promise in front of the entire world, daring other nations to do the same. Each conversion chips at the Fort Knox hoard and at global confidence. Officials in Washington fume but can do little. The rules they wrote in 1944 give France every right to demand gold for its dollars. De Gaulle has found the fault line Triffin described and is pressing on it with all his weight. But France was not acting alone in the machinery that held the gold price steady. Behind the scenes, a fragile alliance of central banks was defending the $35 line, and it was about to break. To keep gold pinned at $35 an ounce on the open market, 8 nations had built a defensive alliance. Created in 1961, the London Gold Pool united the United States with Britain, West Germany, France, Italy, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Switzerland. When the free market price in London threatened to rise above $35, the pool would sell gold from its combined reserves to push it back down. When it fell, they would buy. The United States shouldered half the burden. For a few years the mechanism worked, holding the official price steady and preserving the illusion of permanence. But the same pressures Triffin had named kept mounting. Rising dollar creation, growing speculation, and eroding confidence forced the pool to sell more and more gold to hold the line, hemorrhaging the very reserves it was meant to protect. France, true to de Gaulle's convictions, saw no reason to spend French gold defending the American dollar. In June 1967, France quietly withdrew from the pool, leaving the remaining 7 to carry the weight and signaling to the markets that even insiders no longer believed in the arrangement. The strain became unbearable in the winter of 1967 and early 1968. Britain devalued the pound in November 1967, shattering confidence further. Speculators, sensing that the $35 peg could not hold, poured into gold, betting on an inevitable revaluation. In the first weeks of March 1968, demand exploded. On some days, the pool lost hundreds of tons. Over a fortnight, buyers stripped away nearly 1,000 tons of gold. The London market was overwhelmed. On March 15, 1968, the British government closed the gold market at Washington's urging. Within days, the pool was abandoned entirely. In its place, the authorities improvised a 2-tier system. Central banks would continue trading gold among themselves at the official $35, while a separate free market would let the private price float wherever it wished. It was a confession dressed as a solution. The official price was now a fiction maintained only between governments, disconnected from what the world would actually pay. The dike had cracked, and into that crack poured a flood of new dollars from a war and a set of promises America could not stop financing. By 1965, the United States committed to 2 wars at once. In the jungles of Vietnam, American troop numbers climbed toward 500,000 by 1968, and the annual cost of combat surged past $20 billion. At home, President Lyndon Johnson launched the Great Society, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, urban renewal, an ambitious domestic empire funded on credit. Guns and butter, the economists called it. The country would pay for both without raising taxes to cover the bill. The result was dollars. Torrents of them. Federal spending outran federal revenue, and the difference flooded into the world economy. Between 1965 and 1970, the U.S. money supply expanded relentlessly, and consumer prices followed. Inflation, which had hovered near 1% in the early 1960s, climbed above 5% by 1969. Every dollar bought less bread, less steel, less oil, yet each one still claimed, by treaty, the right to 1/35 of an ounce of gold at $35. Foreign central bankers did the arithmetic. If American prices were rising but the gold price stayed frozen, then gold was becoming the cheapest asset on earth. Why hold depreciating paper when Washington still promised to hand over metal at a 1944 price? The logic was irresistible. Germany's Bundesbank, the Swiss National Bank, the Bank of France, all watched their dollar piles grow and quietly calculated when to trade them for bullion. Inside the Treasury, officials tracked the outflow with mounting dread. The U.S. gold stock, roughly $20 billion worth at mid-decade, drained steadily toward 10. Every shipment out of the New York Federal Reserve, or Fort Knox, was a promise honored and a reserve diminished. The dollar glut Robert Triffin had named a decade earlier was no longer a theory. It was a hemorrhage measured in tons. Washington tried moral suasion, gentlemen's agreements, appeals to Allied loyalty. It worked for a while because West Germany and Japan valued American protection. But sentiment could not repeal arithmetic forever. The dollars abroad now exceeded U.S. gold several times over. The system's fuse was lit, its length unknown. All it needed was one large holder, panicked and unsentimental, to demand payment in full, and in the summer of 1971, that holder appeared. The spring of 1971 brought the reckoning. In early May, West Germany, unable to stem the flood of dollars pouring into its markets, abandoned its fixed exchange rate and let the Deutschmark float. Speculators smelled blood. Money surged out of dollars and into marks, francs, and Swiss francs by the billions. The Bretton Woods peg, the anchor of the post-war world, was buckling in real time. The numbers grew terrifying. In the first half of 1971, the U.S. balance of payments deficit exploded. By summer, foreign governments held some $40 billion in claims against an American gold stock worth barely $10 billion. The promise of $35 an ounce was now backed by roughly $1 of metal for every $4 of paper. Everyone could see it. The only question was who would demand payment first. Switzerland converted. France pressed its claims. Then, in the second week of August, came the blow that ended the debate. Britain, America's closest ally, requested gold cover for $3 billion of its reserves, seeking guarantees against the falling currency. To the men in Washington, it felt like the Bank of England knocking at the vault door. At the Treasury, Secretary John Connally watched the reserves evaporate. Fort Knox and the New York Fed were being drained faster than shipments could be counted. Undersecretary Paul Volcker calculated the trajectory. At this rate, the gold window would empty within weeks. There was no scenario in which the United States could honor all outstanding dollars at $35 an ounce. The promise made in 1944 had become mathematically impossible to keep. Nixon returned from a trip to find his economic team in crisis. Inflation was rising, unemployment stuck near 6%, and now the dollar itself was under siege from allies and speculators alike. Devaluation, wage controls, import taxes. Every option was radical. Every option carried political risk. But doing nothing meant watching the last American gold roll out to foreign creditors. On Friday, August 13th, Nixon summoned his closest advisors. Their destination was secret, their mission unprecedented. They boarded helicopters bound for the presidential retreat in the Maryland mountains, Camp David. "16 men gathered at Camp David that weekend of August 13th to 15, 1971. Nixon imposed absolute secrecy. No leaks, no phone calls, no word to Congress or America's allies. Treasury Secretary John Connally dominated the room, brash and decisive. Beside him sat the cautious Paul Volcker, Federal Reserve Chairman Arthur Burns, and Budget Director George Shultz. What they drafted over 2 days would rewrite the rules of global money. Connally framed the choice bluntly. The United States could keep bleeding gold and defending an impossible price, or it could act first and dictate terms. The plan they assembled was called the New Economic Policy, an aggressive package unlike anything in peacetime. It would freeze wages and prices for 90 days to break inflation. It would slap a 10% surcharge on imports to pressure trading partners. And at its center sat the decision that would echo for generations, closing the gold window. Burns objected. Suspending convertibility, he warned, might shatter confidence and unleash chaos in world markets. But Connally's logic prevailed. The dollars abroad could never be redeemed in full. Better to end the fiction decisively and force the world to renegotiate on American terms. Nixon agreed. The speechwriters worked through Sunday to shape the address. On Sunday evening, August 15, 1971, Nixon appeared on national television, preempting the popular Western bonanza. Speaking calmly, he told 60 million Americans he had directed the Treasury to suspend the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He wrapped the decision in the language of strength, defending the dollar against speculators, protecting American jobs. He did not use the word devaluation. He did not dwell on what had just died. But it had died. In a single announcement, the $35 promise made at Bretton Woods in 1944 was gone. The dollar was no longer tied to metal. Foreign governments could no longer bring their paper to the vault and demand bullion. The window that Charles de Gaulle's warships had exploited, that Britain had knocked upon days before, was bolted shut forever. Markets opened Monday to a transformed world. What would replace the vanished anchor, no one yet knew. The system would spend 2 years searching for a new foundation, and finding none. The world did not collapse on August 16, 1971, but it drifted. For 4 months, negotiators scrambled to rebuild what Nixon had unmade. In December 1971, finance ministers met in the Smithsonian Castle in Washington and produced the Smithsonian Agreement. The dollar was devalued. Gold repriced from $35 to $38 an ounce, and exchange rates were realigned within wider bands. Nixon hailed it as the greatest monetary agreement in the history of the world. It lasted barely 14 months. Without convertibility, there was nothing to defend the new pegs but promises, and promises could not stop speculation. In February 1973, the dollar was devalued again to $42 an ounce. Still, the pressure mounted. By March 1973, the major economies gave up entirely. The Deutsche Mark, the yen, the pound, the franc, all were set loose to float, their values determined not by treaty, but by the daily verdict of currency markets. The gold standard, in every meaningful sense, was finished. The link between money and metal, which had bound commerce for centuries and anchored the post-war order for a generation, simply dissolved. Gold itself soared free of its shackles, from $35 an ounce toward $100, then hundreds more as the decade wore on. The price Bretton Woods had frozen became a memory. Consider what changed. For all of human history, money had ultimately meant something you could weigh in your hand. Coins of silver, bars of gold, a metal with mass and scarcity. Charles de Gaulle understood this instinct when he sent warships to carry French gold home. He wanted the real thing, not the promise. After 1971, the promise was all that remained. The dollar was now backed by nothing you could touch. No vault, no metal, no fixed weight. It was backed only by the credibility of the United States government, the productivity of its economy, and the collective belief of billions that a dollar tomorrow would still buy what a dollar buys today. The anchor was gone, and in its place stood something at once fragile and immensely powerful. The dollar became pure trust.